Thank you so much for having me. I'm Mitra, and it's a pleasure to be back here. I've been here on various occasions doing various things other than talking, which is the one thing that I think I do well. So it's nice to be here and actually do that. I wanted to give you a little bit of a brief background about who I am, just so you understand where the information that you're hearing about today comes from. Especially because oftentimes it may almost sound like a Bio 101 class, and I want you to understand why that's the case. I received my PhD in nothing related to mindfulness or meditation, but in neuroscience, which I guess is tangentially related since it's about the brain. But my research area was on spinal cord injuries. So I looked for about 12 years at how stem cells can treat people from paralysis. So a world that is entirely different from mindfulness. But how did I end up in this path? I digressed after finishing my graduate degree, and I started to take a detour towards the world of health and wellness, just because it was a personal passion. But the way that I approach health is very different from perhaps the way that others in this landscape approach it. My viewpoint on health and wellness is evidence-based. I take everything that I've learned as a scientist and someone who studied biology in the brain, and I try and understand how it applies in some of these trends or health and wellness concepts that we know. So, for instance, I'm not interested in what Kim Kardashian thinks is the hippest, coolest, newest trend. I want to know what the scientific community says, and I want to know what the literature supports and negates. So everything that you'll hear about today in this talk is related to that background. It comes from a scientific perspective. Oftentimes it may sound like a Bio 101 class, like I said, because I also teach at UCLA, and I have a tendency to do that, but I also want you to be very interactive. So if you have questions, if something isn't making sense, raise your hand and ask away. Before we start our conversation, I know this is going to sound very unconventional at a mindfulness workshop, but does anyone have their phones on them? Do people have phones on them at all? If you have your phone on you, I want to ask you to go on this website, and not everybody has to vote. So if you don't have your phone, don't panic. It's okay. We just want to get a little bit of a sense for how stressed out you are. So you can go on menti.com and put in this code, 245237, and we're going to watch in real time how stressed out you guys actually are. So we'll see here as this slowly starts to populate. This is the code, by the way, up here, just in case you missed it on the other slide. So go ahead and vote. Oh, what happened? There we go. So one person seems to have smoke coming out of their ears. I'm worried about you. But you're in the right place. So and as we begin to populate this, obviously we'll see where this particular audience on this specific day falls. And it doesn't necessarily mean that this is how you always are, of course. But one of the things that I want to highlight here, and you can continue to vote, but one of the things that I want to show you, again, coming from a scientific standpoint, is a trend. So I've been asking this question since November of 2018, as I've been giving this talk. And you can see on this x-axis, I have the, let me actually use this instead. On the x-axis, I have the dates, right? The dates of all the different talks. This is you guys, current. On the y-axis is the number of people that have voted. Now, obviously, depending on the audience number, these are going to be different. The lines you look at are going to be different. But I want to just show you a trend that I find really interesting. So here's the I'm chill line. You can see it highlighted. You can see a specific pattern. In November, there seemed to be a lot of people who were very chill, and then over time, this number started to decrease somewhat. And you guys seem to be somewhere in the middle of that trend. But again, I want you to watch the pattern. Slightly overwhelmed people. Oh, okay, so you guys are a little more overwhelmed. But for the most part, the pattern is similar. The numbers follow the same trend. What I find fascinating is this line. The numbers of people who attend these talks and have smoke coming out of their ears is the lowest. This is across the board from November to today with a sample size of close to about 10 lectures. It's always been the lowest. Why do you think that is? Why is it that in a mindfulness talk, talking about reduction of stress, there are the lowest number of people who have smoke coming out of their ears? Go ahead. Very good. So this is a hypothesis, right? It's not proven. We don't have any data to support it. But I take the same hypothesis that the people who are the most stressed often ignore those signs of stress and therefore feel that they're doing okay. And they're less likely to attend something that helps them reduce those stress levels. Which really means that the onus is somewhat on you to take some of this information back to your peers and colleagues who perhaps are not here and are under a lot of stress, and letting them know, educating them about everything that you've learned so that they can also learn how to handle that stress. I also saw something really interesting as I was walking into this theater today. Right at the top of the theater, it says, stress makes you stronger. Is there a dichotomy with respect to what you see at the top of this theater and the fact that I'm standing here today telling you should reduce your stress levels? Is there? There's a dichotomy? Everyone thinks so? Yes? No? So the answer is actually no. There is no dichotomy, and here's the reason. Certain types of stress make you stronger, and certain types of stress will kill you. So the type of stress that we're talking about in this room today is chronic stress. That's the stress that stays long term. My assumption is that the stress that the theater is referring to is what we call acute stress, which is actually known as EU stress, EU, which stands for, what does EU stand for? Does anyone know? Good. Whenever you put EU in front of any word, it means good. So acute stress is actually the good type of stress. It's the fight or flight. It's the thing that makes you move and grow. That's good. That will make you stronger. What I hope to teach you today in this class is that the chronic stress is what you want to be fighting off. And hopefully you'll have some tools by the end of this session to be able to do that. So let's come back to our discussion of stress and how mindfulness counteracts all of that. There are obviously a lot of things that can make us stressed out. As these different words here are going to pop up, many of you are probably going to start to get a little stressed, and you're going to feel your heart rate increasing because we have a lot on our minds. There are a lot of things that are happening around us on a day-to-day basis that make us feel anxious and worried. And this worry, persisting long-term, can have detrimental effects on our health. And that is the topic of our discussion today. But before we even can talk about the effect of stress on health and how mindfulness counters it, we have to define mindfulness, which is, what do you think mindfulness is? What's that? Being present. So that's a good definition. It's not all-encompassing of the whole definition, but it gets us close to it. So I'll read you the full definition, and then we'll look at it in more detail. Mindfulness, also known as meditation, is the awareness that arises through paying attention on purpose in the present moment and in a non-judgmental fashion. So mindfulness is not the idea that you have to take a trip to Tibet and become Zen with nature, which is oftentimes the way that we think about the concepts of meditation and mindfulness. We think in order to be mindful, you have to move away from the world. If that was the case, how many of us could reduce our stress levels? If we had to go to Tibet, we barely go to a park to become one with nature. So there's no way that the concept of getting away from things is what causes us to be mindful or reduces our stress. It's actually in the trenches of everyday life that we can be mindful. And the way to do that is to simply be present. As an example, you're here right now, sitting in this room, listening to this talk. How can you be mindful? A simple way to practice mindfulness right now, based on this definition, being present. Pay attention. Don't think about the emails that are coming through your inbox right now. Don't think about your phone, the text messages, the projects that are happening, what you're going to do for the weekend. All of that takes you away from the concept of mindfulness. Mindfulness is being here. When we have conversations with friends, how many times have you walked away from a conversation and thought, I have no idea what she just even said? Because your mind was elsewhere. There have been times when I've been in the shower and midway through, I have no idea if I shampooed my hair or not, right? Because my mind is just not there. So these are very typical ways that we exhibit mindlessness, but there are ways to counter that, and there are exercises that we can do to, in fact, develop this habit of mindfulness more and more. But what I also find really interesting in this definition is this last part, in a non-judgmental fashion. And the reason for this is that we're human, and we're gonna drift away. Our thoughts can't be focused all the time. What really hurts us is when we start to judge that, and we say, why can't I just focus? Why am I here in this room trying to understand this, but I can't bring myself to listen? That judgment itself is counterproductive to the concept of mindfulness. You need to be able to let it go. You recognize, look, I was here up until 5 minutes ago and I just lost it. I went elsewhere. I've been in my emails for the last 5 minutes. Fine. Bringing myself back. So that's what we want to eventually be able to develop. Now, what is the effect of all of this on our health? If we're here talking about it, it means that it's got to have something to do with the way that we live our lives, hopefully increasing longevity and lifespan even. To answer this question, let's talk about health for a moment. What is the definition of health? And maybe I'll make it a little bit easier to categorize. There are 3 things that make up what we consider health components. What are they? 3 factors that we have to be attentive to in order to call ourselves healthy. Sleep, which falls into a bigger umbrella term. Physical, good. So one component is physical health. Second, mental, good. Third, emotional or social, very good. So physical, mental, and social. These are the 3 categories of health according to the World Health Organization. What this means is that the person with 6-pack abs may be physically fit, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're healthy, right? Health goes beyond skin deep. So you have to be able to maintain these other components of health as well in order to actually call yourself a healthy person. Now, what's interesting is that the foundation of all 3 of the categories of health is mindfulness. If we can build a more mindful practice in our day, we can affect our overall health. And I'm going to show you how data has supported this claim. Studies have shown that people who practice mindfulness, so if you take 2 groups of people, put one category into the category that practices for 8 weeks a specific program of mindfulness-based stress reduction and compare them to your control group who doesn't do anything, what you find is that they often report being less anxious in general. So it's affecting their mental well-being, right? Now, the caveat of all of this for me personally is that I'm not a big fan of subjective surveys. I think with subjective surveys, there's a lot of ways for you to have bias, to introduce bias. If I joined a program that was focused on mindfulness, I promise you 8 weeks later, I'll tell you I'm less stressed out. So that makes sense. But you can't fake quantitative data. And the quantitative data here is heart rate and blood pressure. So what you do is you put a blood pressure cuff on all of these people, 2 different groups, control and experimental, and what you find is that the experimental group who has gone through mindfulness-based stress reduction at the end of the 8-week program has lower heart rate and lower blood pressure. So both physical health and from a survey-based perspective, mental well-being are affected as a result of a practice of mindfulness. Second, it has been shown that mindfulness increases what's called neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. Those are 2 big words, so let's break them down. What's neurogenesis? Anyone know? Break down even the word itself. What's neuro? What is it? Brain, yeah. And genesis? Beginning, creation, birth. So what would neurogenesis be? I have this fantastic ability to hear everyone at once, but, but if you raise your hand, anyone know neurogenesis? Not the genetic makeup, but it's the birth of new cells within the brain, right? Neurogenesis. So these cells that are being recreated, essentially. And neurogenesis was a concept that we didn't actually believe existed up until the year 94. We used to think for about 100 years, from the time of a scientist called Ramon y Cajal in early 1900s, we used to think you are born with a certain number of brain cells. Throughout development until adulthood, you make more of these. And then from adulthood onwards, it's all downhill. Every time that you drink, for instance, you kill your brain cells. Done. Those never come back. That was the hypothesis, which would be a very scary thought if it was true, as you can imagine. So what we learned in 94 is that the brain is actually capable of making new neurons. It can do that. We have cells in our brain, stem cells, that are able to divide and make brand new neurons in the brain. Now, what's been shown through studies over the past 10 years is that mindfulness, engaging in mindfulness-based stress reduction programs, increases the birth of these new neurons. And how this was shown was through a study done at Harvard in Sarah Lazar's lab, historic study on mindfulness. And she showed that with an 8-week program, doing MRI scans of brains of control groups versus those who were in this mindfulness-based stress reduction, there was an increase in the thickness of a specific area of the brain called the hippocampus, which is actually the region of the brain involved in, anyone know? No, learning and memory. So we can actually thicken our brains and the specific region of the brain that's involved in learning by practicing mindfulness. That's one aspect of it. But the second is this concept of neuroplasticity, which is the idea of rerouting the networks in your brain. Right now, as you're sitting here, you're going through neuroplasticity. Your brain is making new connections because you're learning something new. Now, what happens with mindfulness is these connections end up getting more and more stabilized. So you reinforce many of the positive habits, for instance, that you're trying to develop. And this has been shown in many behavioral and psychological studies where people, for instance, who are trying to lose an addictive habit with mindfulness are better able to reinforce the positive pathways that will drive them away from addiction. So it can literally change the brain, which affects both physical and mental well-being. And it can even be argued that it affects social well-being. This one is really interesting. The physical, another physical aspect of mindfulness. It decreases overeating. How? So again, I'm not interested in anecdotes or stories or sort of these fictional imaginations in our head. I want to know the biology behind it. Does anyone have a guess as to how being mindful may decrease overeating? Absolutely. So many times, I'm sure, you've sat in front of the TV and before you know it, the bag of chips is done. And you have no idea how this even happened. And it's simply because we're not present. I'm not aware of what I'm putting into my mouth. But biologically, there's a very logical pathway as to why this happens. How many of you have heard of the idea that you should eat within a 20-minute window whenever you want to eat? Do you know why? Very good. So let's take it back for a moment. What part of the body is it that tells you you're full? Who tells you you're full? The brain, right? But you don't feed the brain. You feed the stomach. So there has to be a way for the stomach to communicate to the brain that I'm full. And that pathway exists. When we eat, this food goes into the stomach. I was going to say the brain. The food goes into the stomach. As the stomach begins to expand, there are these things called mechanoreceptors that sense the pressure on the stomach. These mechanoreceptors get active once the stomach expands enough to a point where we're full, and then send a signal to the brain that says, stop. And the brain will secrete a whole bunch of hormones, ghrelin, CCK, a whole bunch of things that are released at that point that tell you you're done. These are called satiety hormones. And then you stop. That pathway takes 20 minutes. So oftentimes if you eat fast, because you're not practicing mindful eating, you're just on the go. I'm watching my inbox on my computer, answering the phone, maybe even driving at the same time and eating. Perfect definition of lack of mindfulness. You're eating fast. And what happens at the 25-minute mark? Anybody who's experienced this? After you eat super fast and it's 25 minutes later, what do you say? I'm way too full. Because the signal took too long to get to the brain and you overate. So the concept of eating slower, which in and of itself is a mindfulness exercise, will decrease overeating, which affects physical well-being. Mindfulness has also been shown to decrease depression, and there are so many studies that have shown this, all obviously related back to the concept of reducing anxiety and stress. So many of these have tons of different references and data for. But there are also other things that mindfulness does. For instance, it's been shown to reduce susceptibility to disease. So people who engage in regular mindfulness programs have higher levels of circulating white blood cells. And these white blood cells are the things that help us fight infections. So when you have higher levels of immune cells in your body, when you're in contact with some sort of a virus or bacteria, you're better able to fight it off. And this has been shown in multiple studies. It promotes successful aging, more than likely, via the effect that it has on dementia and reducing the risk of dementia, which makes a lot of sense given that it changes the way the brain operates. It changes both the presence of the different neurons in the brain as well as those connections, the freeways and networks within the brain. So lots of positive benefits with mindfulness. But how does it do all of this? This is the very interesting component of mindfulness where sort of the idea of psyche and biology meet. Because if you think about it, I'm telling you that an exercise that is entirely cognitive, that is mental, is going to change your entire well-being. There has to be a biological mechanism for this. So we have to figure out what that is. And the best way to understand that mechanism is to come at it from the other side, which is the effect of stress on the body. Because mindfulness reduces stress levels. So let's talk about stress. What does stress do to you? What's that? Causes acne, sure. What else does it do? It affects your hormones. Very good. What's the hormone that's released during stress? Cortisol. Yeah, so it increases the levels of cortisol. And that is sort of the first wave of trigger for what happens next. When cortisol is released in the brain and eventually gets to all the different cells in the body, there are a number of different processes that happen in all the different cells in the body. And I'll tell you what all of these are. But to talk about that, I have to give you a little bit of a background. So at this very moment that you're sitting here, right, you're not under a tremendous amount of stress. There are 2 people who have smoke coming out of their ears, but the rest are under okay, tolerable amounts of stress. Now, as you're sitting here doing nothing really that's damaging to your body, in fact, you're learning new things and it's great. But at the same time, your body, the cells in your body are breaking down. They're dying. Why are they dying? Because you're alive. Because you're breathing. Every time that your heart pumps, every time that your lungs breathe, every time that you give blood to the rest of your body, that's work for your body, right? The body is a machine. It's nothing different than any other machine. Every machine produces energy, the way that our bodies are right now. They're producing energy so that we can live. But at the same time, every machine that produces energy produces what comes out the waste. So we are constantly accumulating waste in our bodies, even as we sit here right now. We're generating these toxins in the body. Now, the body has a mechanism in place where it gets rid of these toxins. It has to. If it didn't, we would die very quickly. So it has spontaneous mechanisms through which it gets rid of this. And this is through the release of things called antioxidants, which you've probably heard about when everybody tells you you should eat tons of blueberries or strawberries or any kind of berries, because these are all antioxidants that you can give to yourself in order to get rid of some of these toxins, which we call free radicals. Now, when you're under stressful conditions, cortisol will increase the production of these free radicals. So every cell in your body, which comes into contact with cortisol, and every cell does, every single cell will produce more waste than it should. And now you have much more toxicity to deal with. That's the effect of stress. Now, the problem is that this toxicity will result in your cells dying. It's toxic, so it will kill them. And that's how we age. So what does mindfulness do? Mindfulness will counteract this process, which is the process of oxidative stress, the process of accumulating all of this damage or these toxins. Oxidative stress, like I told you, normally increases cell death. So the cells in your body will eventually die the more of these toxins stick around. And cell death is one of the current leading theories of aging. We become old and we die because the cells in our bodies die. If you want to increase that longevity, if you want to increase lifespan, you have to somehow interfere with this pathway. And the way to do that is to reduce oxidative stress. And you can reduce oxidative stress in many ways. One example I just gave earlier, like, taking some additional natural sources of antioxidants. Exercise is another one. There are many different ways to do it. But mindfulness is one of the simplest because it's a simple thought exercise. And today you'll learn some of the ways that you can do this. It doesn't require going to the gym. It doesn't require you stopping yourself from eating something you love. All it requires is about 3 to 4 minutes every day of just sitting and practicing something that will calm you down. And that can affect all branches of health. So it's fundamental. And if you think back to that first slide that I showed you, it's at the foundation. You change that and you change the other pieces. So how do we do this? How many people here have some kind of a mindfulness program for themselves? Raise your hand if you do. Excellent. Okay, this half of the room. So from the people who raise your hands, what are some of the things that you do? If you want to share, go ahead. Breathing, perfect. What else? Other people. Calm app, perfect. Okay, excellent. What else? Yoga. Anything else? What's that? Hanging with your dogs. Perfect. Perfect. So there are, as you can see, there are a number of different ways to practice mindfulness. And not every method will work for everyone. But I'm going to share with you some of the most common, at least scientifically common methods that have been shown through literature to actually work with data. The first, which no one actually mentioned, is keeping a journal. So studies have shown that people who maintain a daily journal are typically less stressed out and more mindful throughout the day, and are also reporting to be happier in general, which is a very interesting connection. And the concept of a journal doesn't have to be anything fancy. All you have to do is sit down for 2, 3, 5 minutes a day and just write out your thoughts. Just what's coming in. Whatever is coming in that moment, just put it out onto a piece of paper. And these studies were, in fact, so impressive in terms of their data that there are now companies that are making journals specifically for this purpose. There's something called the 5-minute journal. I believe you guys are getting the handout as you exit. Is that the case? It's on there. This list is on there. The 5-minute journal is being sold at Amazon. It basically is a page or a book full of the same page over and over again, but it just asks you a series of questions, and every day you just answer those questions. 5 minutes. That's it. That's a practice of mindfulness. You can also buy the app, but you have to pay for the app as well. So that's one. The second is recalling 3 to 5 blessings a day. This was a really interesting one. This was a study done at UC Davis that showed that people who recalled 3 to 5 blessings every day in the morning reported general overall happiness more so than those who didn't. And for me, understanding this concept was a little bit challenging. I wasn't exactly sure how this process would reduce stress levels or how it would ultimately lead to more mindfulness until I had one experience. And it's never happened again, but it was a very coincidental experience that really made me tangibly understand how this process works. I have a personal mindfulness program for myself every day in the morning that I do, and usually it's accompanied with music. One of the days that I was listening to music, the blessing that I recalled in my head, one of them was the ability to hear. I was just thankful for the fact that when I put this headphone on my ears, I can actually hear the music. Fast forward several hours later in that day, I got into an argument with someone who was trying very adamantly with a very loud voice to impose her opinion onto me, with which I disagreed. And I felt like I had very valid reasons to disagree with it. And her voice kept getting louder and louder, and she was going through this limbic hijack of getting very emotional about it. And the whole time that she was yelling, what came to my head? Do you think? What's that? I actually was. I said, at least I can hear her. And in that moment, when I thought to myself, and this was simply a coincidence, right? That in the morning I happened to say I'm thankful for hearing, and in the afternoon this particular experience happens, and I recognize that I'm thankful for the fact that I can hear her. And that calmed me down. I just thought, you know what? Keep going. It's okay. I'm just going to listen because this is actually great. I can hear you. And she went on, and when she finally calmed down, I very calmly responded. And in that moment, I realized this is the effect, that it changed my perspective about a particular experience that I was having, and instead of getting me emotional, it made me calm. And this is actually in another lecture that I give about the concept of limbic hijack, which is literally the idea that the brain will just go through, it gets hijacked emotionally. And then you just don't even know what you're doing. You just respond with any kind of reactive emotion that you have. Mindfulness suppresses that. And it's able to manage the way that we respond in terms of our emotions, which is exactly what happened to me. Another one is following guided meditations, which no one mentioned, but I'm sure you've heard of it. This is the one we're doing today. We're actually going to practice a guided meditation just for the sake of understanding whether or not it's our thing, we like it or not. I'll tell you more about that. Focusing on breath, which was mentioned. I have a whole other series just focusing on breath. This particular program, MBSR, is the program that was developed through the lab of Sarah Lazar at Harvard. So it's now very popular. It was developed about 10 years ago, and now many universities actually offer the course, so you can take it. It costs money, obviously, to enroll in the course, but they do provide audios, free MP3 audios. Of some of their meditations online. And some of the institutions that I know for a fact have this are UCI, UCLA, and UCSD. And I personally prefer these audios to many of the other, perhaps, audios that you may find on YouTube, just because YouTube, it's hit and miss. Sometimes you get some really cheesy things, but this is a very academic approach to the concept of mindfulness. And lastly, yoga, or generally any kind of exercise. And of course, this isn't an all-encompassing list. Like was mentioned, it could be that hanging out with pets, with your dogs, with animals can also change the way that it reduce stress. And in fact, this is so common, that there are now these puppy petting parties, if you've heard of them, where you can actually use the concept of petting a dog to relax and reduce stress levels. So there are a lot of different ways. But what we're going to do today is practice one form of meditation, mindfulness meditation, and that's a guided meditation. It's not for everyone. I will tell you that right off the bat. So it's possible that you'll do this and at the end of it think, this wasn't for me, I'm bored, I couldn't even focus, my thoughts were elsewhere. But it might work for some people. If it doesn't work for you, I just want to make sure I encourage you to recognize that there are other ways to practice mindfulness. This isn't the only way. But the concept of a guided meditation is that the person who guides, in this case me, is going to give you a lot of detail. So I'm going to take you somewhere. In this case, we're going to go to a library. We're going to go somewhere, and I'm going to give you a lot of detail for you to be able to visualize this journey, step by step. This detail is intentional. Everybody's images are going to be different, but the point of providing the detail is so that you stay with me and detract you away from other distracting thoughts. We're gonna take this journey. It's about a 15-minute meditation. You are more than welcome to relax in every possible way that you can, and I'll guide you through even the relaxation part of it. It's eyes closed the whole time. You may fall asleep. Happens. I would say 9 times out of 10, I don't have a group that doesn't have at least one person fall asleep. So absolutely feel free to sleep. Some people may cry. Some people may hate it. Some people may be bored with it. I mean, lots of different emotional responses to this guided meditation. But I just ask you to go through it with an open mind and see if this is something that will work for you. Like I said, we're going into a library today. If at any point you suddenly hear me say something, like, you're at the top of 5 stairs, and you think to yourself, I have no idea how I got here, because you missed everything else that I had said earlier. That's okay. Remember, non-judgmental, right? I am where I am. Let's just keep moving. We keep going with the journey. Don't perseverate on why you missed out the first few minutes of it. This particular meditation will be accompanied with some music. It doesn't always have to be. In some cases, you can just do it silently. And I hope that you will enjoy it. But before we go on to it, one of the things that I've been doing recently is asking people to take their heart rates before we start the meditation and then do it again after. Now, I don't necessarily expect that there would be a big change. This is one session for 15 minutes. In order to really experience a big change in heart rate and blood pressure, you have to practice this long term, at least 8 weeks. So I don't expect changes, but I've seen some really staggering numbers oftentimes. We only measure the heart rate in 15 seconds, so you can multiply that by 4 to get your beats per minute. But in those 15 seconds, if your heart rate even drops 1 or 2 before and after mindfulness, that's a huge drop. That's about an 8-count drop in your beats per minute, which is staggering, actually, and that has happened in the past. So before we start that, I'm going to have you find your heart rate. And the way to find it is either you can take your middle and index finger and put it onto your jugular vein. This is the easiest, in my opinion, because you can feel it very well. Or on your wrist, find your pulse here. And trust me, you have a pulse. I've been through some classes where people say, I don't have a pulse. So I'll give you a second to find it, and then I will tell you when to count. And count. Stop. You can write that number down for yourself. That's your number. Excellent. Can we maybe dim the lights? Can I do that from here? Okay. Oh, they'll do it? Okay. Great. So we'll dim the lights, literally getting you ready to fall asleep. I'm just going to sit in the corner because you don't need to see me. But I will be doing this alongside you, and all you need is just to hear me. So let's get started by just sitting in an easy seated position, whatever that is for you. If it's legs crossed, feet just straight down, whatever feels easy to you. And begin to sit up tall reaching up through the crown of the head, pulling the shoulders down and away from the ears, and close your eyes. Close your eyes and just begin to notice your breath. Notice how you inhale and how you exhale. No intention to change anything. Just noticing. Bring awareness to how the breath moves through your nostrils and into your lungs. And on the exhale, it expires out of your nostrils. Notice how on the inhales, your shoulders rise up towards your ears. And on your exhales, they begin to fall down. Notice how the chest expands on that inhale. And drops on the exhale. Staying connected with this movement of breath. On your next exhale, pull your stomach all the way back towards your spine. Empty out the lungs. And then take a deep inhale in through the nose. Fill up the lungs all the way to the top of the chest. Hold the breath at the top. And let it go, exhale. And with that exhale, find yourself in the middle of a very crowded street. Chaos everywhere. Children screaming, sirens, cars passing by. There's a lot of noise around you. As you begin to make your way through the crowds, taking one step at a time, you find that just a bit further up, there's an alley. It seems like it might be quieter there. So you walk towards it. Make a turn and step into this alley that already feels more quiet than the street. With every step you take, the noise drowns out even more. As you get farther and farther away from the street, on your left-hand side, you see a set of double doors. They look inviting. So you walk towards them, push through, and find yourself at the top of 5 stairs. The noise behind you is already more quiet. You begin to walk down. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Just as you land, You find yourself in front of another set of doors. This time when you walk through, you're in a library. This is one of those old school libraries. High ceilings, dome-shaped, colored windows, stacks and stacks of books from floor to ceiling. In the middle of this library, there's a big, round, wooden table. You walk towards it and find that there's a big book on top. But when you open the book, the pages are blank. There's an old feather-style pen next to this book with some ink. Pick up the pen and begin to write. Write everything that is weighing on your shoulders. Everything that's making you stressed out, anxious. As you write each sentence, imagine that that weight has been lifted off of your shoulders and the book has absorbed it. Bring that last sentence to an end. Put the pen down and close the book. Close the book and walk away, knowing that you feel lighter, but that you can always come back to the same library, open the same book, and find its pages blank for you to write on. Begin to make your way back towards the entry doors of the library. Walk through, finding yourself at the stairs again. Beginning to walk up for 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. You're in front of the double doors. Pull the doors open and step into the alley. For some reason, you can't hear anything anymore. No noise. You begin to walk back towards the street. As you approach it, there's nothing to be heard. You reach the street, go into the walkway, and nothing. No sound, no noise, no chaos. It's the same street, but you are in a different place. With this newfound sense of calm, exhale all the air out. Hold the stomach all the way back towards the spine. And then take a deep inhale in through the nose. Fill up the lungs all the way to the top of the chest and hold the breath at the top. And exhale out. And with that exhale, at your own time, whenever you're ready, gently blink the eyes open. Before we continue, let's take our heart rates one more time. So if you can find your heart rate again. And count. And stop. Anyone experience a change in heart rate? Up, down, lower? Anyone go up? Okay. How did you like the experience? Was it good for you? Okay, good. As long as it was good and it wasn't like anxiety that was causing your heart rate to go up. How was it? Feel free to share in terms of good, bad. It really doesn't matter. It's not for everyone, like I said. So I take no offense to it if you didn't like it. How was it? Right. You start to hear even the air conditioning. Exactly. You start to see and feel even the lights, right? As the lights turned off, you could hear them as they were still sort of on fire and hot. So you just become naturally more aware of your surroundings. This was a longer mindfulness practice than is necessary. So you can just do 3 to 5 minutes, like I said, and just focus on breath if you want, or use the MBSR program to do the MP3s, which are mostly about 3 to 5 minutes as well. But I hope that you begin to develop some sort of a habit so that you can do this on a regular basis. I call mindfulness the breakfast for the brain. So if you can give that to yourself every morning, you're starting your day off right, exactly the way that we would start off a day with breakfast. Any questions, thoughts, comments? What's that? I do. Dr. Hoosh D-R-H-O-O-S-H. And I believe that on the handouts there is my contact information. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to address them. And I think I'm seeing you guys again very soon in a few weeks where we're talking about memory and aging. So look forward to that. And thank you so much for your time and attention. I'm here if you have any questions. Thank you.